The substitute teacher sat perfectly still as the bailiff fastened the metal restraints around her wrists, her eyes never leaving the jury box where 12 ordinary citizens watched in stunned silence. Rebecca Thompson had maintained her composure through 3 days of testimony, but now as the prosecutor painted her as a dangerous vigilante who had brutally attacked innocent men, the courtroom buzzed with whispers of conviction. The judge was reaching for her gavel to call for deliberation when the heavy oak doors burst open with thunderous authority. Every head turned as a woman in pristine naval dress uniform strode down the center aisle, her shoulder boards gleaming with the eagles of an admiral, carrying documents that would change everything anyone thought they knew about the quiet woman in handcuffs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Saturday evening air in Riverside County carried the warm scent of jasmine as families gathered at the Maplewood Elementary Community Center for the annual Reading Heroes charity auction. Children ran between tables decorated with colorful book displays while parents sipped coffee from paper cups and examined silent auction items ranging from restaurant gift cards to handmade quilts. Rebecca Thompson stood near the back wall, clipboard in hand, checking off donated items with the methodical precision that had made her a favorite among the school staff during her 6 weeks as a substitute teacher. At 29, Rebecca possessed the kind of understated presence that made her practically invisible in crowds. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her outfit consisted of a navy cardigan over dark jeans and comfortable flats, the uniform of educators everywhere. Principal Robert Hayes had specifically requested her help with the fundraiser, praising her organizational skills and calm demeanor with the children. To everyone at Maplewood Elementary, Rebecca Thompson was exactly what she appeared to be: a dedicated, reliable substitute teacher who filled in seamlessly wherever needed. Mrs. Nancy Foster, the school secretary, approached with a warm smile, balancing a stack of bid sheets. "Rebecca, you've been such a blessing to our school. The way you handled the Henderson twins during their meltdown last Tuesday was pure magic. Have you considered applying for a permanent position?" Rebecca's response was characteristically modest, deflecting the praise while expressing genuine affection for the students and staff. Yet something in her posture, the way her eyes continuously swept the room, suggested a level of awareness that went beyond typical teacher vigilance. The community center buzzed with the cheerful chaos of a successful fundraiser. Local business owners mingled with military families from the nearby base, their children adding energy to the evening as they raced between displays of student artwork and tables laden with homemade baked goods. Rebecca had volunteered to coordinate the final hour of bidding, ensuring all items were properly cataloged and that winning bidders could complete their purchases smoothly. Her efficiency impressed everyone, but it was her way with the children that truly stood out. She seemed to anticipate their needs before they expressed them, redirecting potential conflicts with gentle words and creating calm wherever she went. As the evening progressed, Rebecca noticed a pattern that made her educational instincts prickle with concern. 3 men in casual clothing had been moving through the crowd for the past hour, but their behavior didn't match that of typical parents or community members. They showed no interest in the auction items, didn't engage in the social conversations flowing around them, and most tellingly, their attention remained focused on specific children rather than the event itself. One man had been observing 8-year-old Emma Martinez, daughter of Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez from the naval base, while his companions had similarly fixated on other military children present. The fundraiser reached its climax as Principal Hayes took the microphone to announce the evening's total: nearly $15,000 raised for new library books and computer equipment. Parents applauded enthusiastically while children cheered, but Rebecca's attention remained fixed on the 3 men who had now positioned themselves near the exit doors. Her training, carefully suppressed for months, recognized the tactical positioning immediately. They were preparing for something, and every instinct screamed that it involved the children they had been watching. As families began gathering their belongings and collecting purchased items, the crowd naturally moved toward the exits in a predictable flow. Rebecca watched the 3 men exchange subtle hand signals, their movements coordinated with military precision that confirmed her worst suspicions. When one of them began following Emma Martinez and her mother toward the parking lot while his companions moved to cover alternative exits, Rebecca abandoned all pretense of being a simple substitute teacher. The transformation was immediate and startling. Gone was the gentle educator who had spent weeks reading stories and grading arithmetic worksheets. Rebecca moved through the crowd with fluid efficiency, her casual demeanor replaced by focused intensity. She intercepted the man following Emma with a polite smile and a request for directions, positioning herself between him and his target, while simultaneously signaling Emma's mother to return inside through subtle gestures that appeared coincidental to casual observers. The man attempted to brush past Rebecca, claiming he was late for another engagement, but she maintained her position with the kind of spatial awareness that suggested extensive training. When he tried to step around her, Rebecca's response was swift and decisive. What appeared to witnesses as a stumble was actually a perfectly executed takedown that left the man on the ground, disoriented and unable to pursue his target. The entire sequence lasted less than 10 seconds, but its implications would reverberate for months. The other two men immediately moved to assist their partner, abandoning any pretense of being innocent bystanders. Their aggressive approach toward Rebecca triggered a response that shocked every witness present. The mild-mannered substitute teacher who had spent weeks patiently explaining fractions and tying shoelaces suddenly demonstrated combat skills that belonged in action movies rather.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Than elementary school fundraisers. She neutralized both men with techniques that were precise, efficient, and utterly devastating in their effectiveness. Principal Hayes, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, stood frozen in disbelief as the woman he had known as a gentle educator secured 3 unconscious men using improvised restraints created from auction banner cord. Rebecca's instructions to call 911 were delivered with calm authority that brooked no argument, and her subsequent directions for crowd control and scene preservation demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond anything a substitute teacher should possess. The responding officers from Riverside Police Department arrived to find a scene that defied explanation. 3 men, later identified as having extensive criminal records and suspected connections to human trafficking networks, lay unconscious in the community center parking lot. Standing over them, still wearing her navy cardigan and comfortable flats, was Rebecca Thompson, who calmly provided a statement that raised more questions than it answered. Detective Mike Sullivan, a 15-year veteran who had seen his share of unusual cases, found himself facing a mystery that challenged everything he thought he knew about crime and capability. The substitute teacher who had single-handedly prevented what appeared to be an attempted kidnapping possessed skills that suggested professional training at the highest levels. When he asked about her background in martial arts or law enforcement, Rebecca's response was polite but uninformative. She claimed to have taken some self-defense classes in college and attributed her success to adrenaline and luck. The paramedics who treated the 3 unconscious men reported injuries consistent with precision strikes designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. Such control required not just training but extensive experience in close-quarters combat. Detective Sullivan noted that Rebecca showed no signs of adrenaline crash or emotional trauma despite having just fought 3 men simultaneously. Her pulse was steady, her breathing controlled, and her answers to his questions were delivered with a composure that seemed almost supernatural. As the investigation unfolded over the following hours, Rebecca's story began to unravel in ways that raised serious concerns among law enforcement. Her references for the substitute teaching position led to voicemail boxes that were never returned. The address on her employment application existed, but neighbors reported seeing her only occasionally and always at different times of day. Her emergency contact information connected to numbers that had been disconnected, and her previous employment history, while documented on paper, proved difficult to verify through direct contact. The breakthrough came when Detective Sullivan ran Rebecca's fingerprints through the federal database system. Instead of the clean results expected for a school teacher, the search returned a response that sent chills through the police station. Access denied. Contact federal authorities immediately. Within hours of that discovery, FBI Special Agent Lisa Carter arrived from the Los Angeles field office with questions that made it clear Rebecca Thompson was far more than she appeared to be. The interrogation that followed lasted 6 hours and yielded nothing. Rebecca sat in the windowless interview room with the same calm composure she had shown while reading to second graders, answering questions with polite brevity that revealed nothing about her true identity or capabilities. Agent Carter employed every technique in her considerable arsenal, from friendly conversation to aggressive confrontation, but Rebecca remained unshakable. Her responses were respectful but uninformative, and her demeanor suggested someone accustomed to maintaining operational security under far more stressful circumstances. As word of Rebecca's arrest spread through the Maplewood Elementary community, parents and staff members struggled to reconcile the woman they knew with the federal investigation now surrounding her. The gentle teacher who had helped their children with reading difficulties and playground disputes had somehow neutralized 3 dangerous men with skills that suggested military or intelligence training. Phone calls flooded the school office as concerned parents demanded answers that Principal Hayes simply could not provide. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for Monday morning in Riverside County Superior Court, with Rebecca facing charges of assault, battery, and disturbing the peace. Despite the circumstances that led to the confrontation, the district attorney's office felt compelled to proceed with prosecution given the severity of the injuries inflicted, and Rebecca's continued refusal to provide any explanation for her actions or background. The case had attracted media attention throughout Southern California, with news outlets describing it as the mystery of the fighting school teacher. Rebecca spent the weekend in county jail, where her behavior continued to puzzle both guards and fellow inmates. She was polite but distant, declining phone calls and legal visits while maintaining a routine that suggested familiarity with incarceration procedures. The jail medical staff noted that despite having fought 3 men simultaneously, she showed no signs of injury or stress-related symptoms. Her blood pressure remained normal, she slept soundly, and she ate her meals with the mechanical efficiency of someone accustomed to institutional food. Public Defender David Rodriguez found himself assigned to represent a client who seemed determined to sabotage her own defense. Rebecca refused to discuss her background, her training, or the circumstances that led to her employment at Maplewood Elementary. When he explained the serious nature of the charges and the likelihood of conviction given the eyewitness testimony, she listened politely but offered no cooperation in building a defense strategy. Her only request was that he ensure the safety of the children who had been at the fundraiser, a concern that Rodriguez found both touching and frustrating given her unwillingness to help herself. The courtroom was packed to capacity when Judge Margaret Chen called the case to order on Monday morning. Media representatives filled the gallery alongside curious community members, parents from the school, and a surprising number of individuals whose professional bearing suggested law enforcement or military backgrounds. Rebecca sat beside her public defender wearing an orange jumpsuit that somehow failed to diminish her natural poise, her hands cuffed behind her back as a security precaution recommended by the Sheriff's Department. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh approached the prosecution with confidence, presenting a case that seemed straightforward despite its unusual circumstances. The defendant had brutally assaulted 3 men at a community event, inflicting injuries that required hospitalization despite claims of acting in defense of others. Security footage from the community center clearly showed Rebecca initiating physical contact, and witness testimony confirmed that she had used excessive force against individuals who posed no immediate threat to anyone present. The prosecution's opening statement painted Rebecca as a dangerous individual who had concealed her violent capabilities, while working around children, raising questions about her true motives for seeking employment at an elementary school. Walsh argued that regardless of any training Rebecca might have received, her actions constituted criminal assault under California law, and demonstrated a disregard for appropriate channels of law enforcement. The state's position was clear: vigilante justice, however well-intentioned, could not be tolerated in a civilized society. David Rodriguez struggled to present an effective defense for a client who refused to cooperate with her own legal representation. His opening statement focused on the heroic nature of Rebecca's actions, arguing that she had prevented the kidnapping of innocent children by men with extensive criminal records. He emphasized that no permanent harm had been done to the attackers, and that Rebecca's intervention had likely saved lives. However, without Rebecca's cooperation in explaining her background or training, his arguments lacked the foundation necessary to justify the level of force she had employed. The testimony phase of the trial revealed the full scope of Rebecca's capabilities through the reluctant admissions of witnesses who had seen her in action. Parents described movements that seemed choreographed in their precision, while the responding paramedics testified about injuries that suggested professional-level combat training. Principal Hayes, clearly uncomfortable with testifying against someone he had come to respect, acknowledged that Rebecca had never mentioned any background in martial arts or law enforcement during her employment at the school. The most damaging testimony came from the 3 victims themselves, who had recovered sufficiently to appear in court under heavy security. Despite their criminal backgrounds, they were still technically victims of assault under the law, and their descriptions of Rebecca's attack painted a picture of calculated violence that went far beyond reasonable self-defense. Their attorney argued that whatever their original intentions might have been, they had committed no crime before being brutally attacked by someone with clearly superior training and capabilities. Detective Sullivan's testimony provided crucial context about the federal investigation surrounding Rebecca's identity, though much of what he had discovered remained classified and inadmissible in state court. He described the anomalies in her background check and the immediate federal interest in her case, but Judge Chen sustained numerous objections that prevented him from revealing the full scope of the mystery surrounding the defendant. As the prosecution rested its case, the weight of evidence seemed overwhelming despite the heroic nature of Rebecca's actions. The jury had heard testimony about her extraordinary capabilities, her deceptive employment under false pretenses, and her complete refusal to explain her background or training. Even parents who were grateful for her protection of their children struggled with the implications of having unknowingly entrusted their students to someone with such carefully concealed abilities. David Rodriguez called only character witnesses in Rebecca's defense, presenting testimony from fellow teachers and parents who described her gentle nature and dedication to the children in her care. Principal Hayes spoke movingly about her positive impact on students and staff, while several parents testified about her kindness and professionalism. However, these testimonials only highlighted the dramatic contrast between Rebecca's public persona and her hidden capabilities, making her deception seem even more calculated and concerning. The closing arguments crystallized the fundamental question facing the jury: could someone be held criminally responsible for using extraordinary skills to protect innocent children, regardless of the deceptive circumstances surrounding her presence in their community? Walsh argued that the law applied equally to everyone and that Rebecca's refusal to explain her actions or background demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Rodriguez countered that heroes often emerge from unexpected places and that Rebecca's secrecy might have legitimate explanations that national security concerns prevented her from revealing. Judge Chen's instructions to the jury emphasized their obligation to consider only the evidence presented in court, regardless of speculation about classified information or federal investigations. The 12 citizens who would decide Rebecca's fate retired to deliberate on charges that could result in several years in prison for someone who had arguably saved children from a fate worse than death. The deliberation lasted 2 days, during which media speculation reached fever pitch and online communities debated every aspect of the case. Supporters painted Rebecca as a hero whose privacy rights were being violated by an ungrateful system, while critics argued that her deception and excessive force demonstrated dangerous tendencies that made her a threat to public safety. The mystery of her true identity had captured national attention, with everyone from former military personnel to legal experts weighing in on the implications of the case. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Rebecca stood beside her attorney as the foreman announced their decision: guilty on all counts, with a recommendation for the maximum sentence given the defendant's continued refusal to cooperate with the court or explain her actions. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, and bailiffs moved to escort Rebecca back to custody as she maintained the same calm composure that had characterized her behavior throughout the entire ordeal. It was at this moment, as Officer James Mitchell approached with handcuffs and the courtroom buzzed with the finality of conviction, that everything changed. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open with an authority that immediately commanded attention from every person present. Admiral Patricia Blackwood strode down the center aisle in full dress uniform, her bearing radiating the kind of command presence that made even hardened law enforcement officers instinctively straighten their postures. Part 2: The Admiral's Authority. Admiral Patricia Blackwood moved through the packed courtroom with the kind of measured confidence that comes from commanding nuclear submarines and classified operations spanning decades. Her uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal precisely positioned, but it was her eyes that commanded the most attention. They swept the room with tactical assessment, cataloging faces, exits, and potential threats with the automatic precision of someone who had operated in hostile territories where a moment's inattention could mean death. Judge Margaret Chen had presided over thousands of cases during her 23 years on the bench, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The woman approaching her bench carried herself with an authority that transcended civilian understanding, and the sealed envelope she handed to the bailiff bore markings that made the judge's heart rate accelerate. Classification stamps, federal seals, and signatures that could only come from the highest levels of government suggested that this simple assault case had dimensions she could never have imagined. Officer James Mitchell found himself frozen mid-step, the handcuffs intended for Rebecca Thompson still in his hands, as every instinct told him to stand at attention. 20 years as a bailiff had given him experience with federal marshals, FBI agents, and even the occasional Secret Service detail. But this was different. The Admiral's presence filled the courtroom with a gravity that made his previous law enforcement encounters seem like training exercises. The spectators in the gallery experienced a collective intake of breath as they witnessed something unprecedented in their civilian lives. Parents who had come to see justice served suddenly found themselves in the presence of military authority that operated on an entirely different level. The media representatives, initially excited about capturing the dramatic conclusion to their story, sensed that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple criminal conviction. David Rodriguez watched his client for any sign of recognition or relief, but Rebecca Thompson maintained the same enigmatic composure that had characterized her entire legal ordeal. If she was surprised by the Admiral's arrival, she gave no indication. Instead, she seemed to be assessing the situation with the same calm calculation she had displayed throughout the trial, as if this dramatic intervention was merely another variable in an equation she had been solving all along. Special Agent Lisa Carter, who had been observing the proceedings from the back of the courtroom, felt her secure phone vibrate with an incoming that made her stomach clench. The text was brief but unambiguous: "Stand down. Federal jurisdiction invoked. Report to SAC immediately." Her investigation into Rebecca Thompson, which had consumed weeks of resources and raised questions that threatened to expose operations she wasn't cleared to know about, was being terminated with a kind of abrupt finality that suggested national security implications far beyond her pay grade. Admiral Blackwood reached the bench and extended the sealed envelope to Judge Chen with a formality that conveyed both respect for the judicial process and absolute confidence in the authority she represented. The documents inside would prove to be classification levels above anything the judge had previously encountered, signed by officials whose names appeared in newspapers only when major international incidents required their attention. The silence in the courtroom stretched beyond normal comfort levels as Judge Chen broke the seal and began reading. Her expression shifted through a series of emotions that the veteran court reporter would later describe as progressing from professional skepticism to growing concern to what could only be called awe. The documents in her hands contained information that recontextualized everything she thought she knew about the woman standing trial in her courtroom. Rebecca Thompson watched the judge's face with the kind of patient attention that suggested she was accustomed to waiting for bureaucratic processes to unfold according to their own internal logic. Her posture remained relaxed despite the handcuffs, and her breathing stayed controlled even as the entire trajectory of her legal fate hung in the balance. The calm she displayed was not the resignation of someone hoping for mercy, but the confidence of someone who knew exactly how this scene would conclude.
The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, found herself in uncharted legal territory as she watched federal authorities supersede her carefully constructed case. Her conviction, which had seemed certain just moments before, was evaporating in real time as classification levels beyond her clearance transformed her defendant from criminal to something else entirely. The weeks of preparation, the testimony from dozens of witnesses, and the jury's careful deliberation were becoming irrelevant in the face of whatever information Admiral Blackwood had brought into her courtroom. Judge Chen finished reading and looked up at Admiral Blackwood with an expression that conveyed both understanding and deep respect. The transformation in her demeanor was immediate and striking, as if the documents had revealed not just information about Rebecca Thompson but about the invisible networks of protection that operated beyond civilian awareness. When she spoke, her voice carried a gravity that made it clear she was addressing not just a military officer but a representative of operations that touched the highest levels of national security. Admiral Blackwood, Judge Chen said, her tone formal but deferential, "I understand from these documents that this matter involves classified operations of the utmost importance to national security. Is that correct?" The Admiral's response was measured and precise, delivered with the kind of professional authority that comes from briefing presidents and congressional committees on matters that never appear in public records. "Your Honor, that is correct. The individual you know as Rebecca Thompson has been operating under deep cover in service to her country. The charges against her arose from actions taken in the course of her assigned duties, and her continued detention poses significant risks to ongoing operations." The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs as the implications of the Admiral's words began to sink in. Parents who had sent their children to school under Rebecca's care suddenly understood that they had been in the presence of someone operating at levels of classification and responsibility they could never have imagined. The gentle substitute teacher who had helped with arithmetic homework and playground disputes was revealed to be something far more complex and significant. Detective Mike Sullivan, who had spent weeks investigating Rebecca's background and growing increasingly frustrated with the mysteries surrounding her identity, felt a mixture of vindication and bewilderment. His instincts had told him that something about her didn't fit the profile of a simple educator, but the reality proved to be far
more extraordinary than his most ambitious theories had suggested. Principal Robert Hayes sat in stunned silence as he processed the revelation that the woman he had trusted with his students, the colleague he had praised for her dedication and competence, was actually a federal operative conducting classified missions. The implications for school security, parent notifications, and his own professional responsibility created a cascade of concerns that would require months to address properly. Admiral Blackwood continued her address to the court with the kind of precise information delivery that suggested extensive experience in managing classified briefings for civilian audiences. "Your Honor, I am authorized to inform you that Agent Thompson's mission involved infiltrating a human trafficking network that specifically targets children of military personnel. Her actions at the Maplewood Elementary fundraiser disrupted a kidnapping operation that would have resulted in the capture and exploitation of innocent children." The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow as parents realized how close their children had come to becoming victims of horrors they had only read about in news reports from other cities. The three men Rebecca had neutralized were not random criminals but operational elements of an international network that had been studying their community, learning their routines, and preparing to strike at the most vulnerable members of their families. Mrs. Nancy Foster, the school secretary who had grown fond of Rebecca during her weeks at Maplewood Elementary, began weeping quietly as she understood that the woman she had considered applying for permanent employment had actually been standing guard over their children against threats they never could have imagined. The gentle efficiency with which Rebecca had handled classroom disruptions took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of someone trained to identify and neutralize dangers before they could develop into crises. Judge Chen addressed the packed courtroom with the authority of someone who understood the weight of the information she had received. "Ladies and gentlemen, in light of classified information provided by the Department of Defense, I am dismissing all charges against the defendant effective immediately. This case is now sealed under federal classification protocols, and I am ordering all participants to respect the national security implications of what has been revealed here today." The dismissal created chaos in the courtroom as media representatives realized they were losing access to what had promised to be the story of the year, while parents and community members struggled to process the implications of learning that their children had been protected by someone whose true mission they could never have suspected. The legal proceedings that had seemed so important just minutes before were suddenly irrelevant in the face of operations that operated at levels of classification far beyond local jurisdiction. Rebecca Thompson stood as the bailiff removed her handcuffs, and for the first time since her arrest her posture shifted in subtle ways that revealed the professional bearing she had been concealing throughout her ordeal. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable, as if layers of carefully constructed civilian persona were being peeled away to reveal someone accustomed to operating in circumstances where the stakes involved life and death rather than simply legal conviction. Part 3. The transformation. The moment Officer Mitchell released the handcuffs from Rebecca's wrists, a transformation began that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. It was not dramatic or sudden, but rather like watching a skilled actress step out of character after a long performance. The slight stoop in her shoulders straightened to reveal military bearing that had been carefully hidden beneath months of civilian camouflage. Her eyes, which had maintained the gentle patience expected of an elementary school teacher, now carried the sharp focus of someone accustomed to processing tactical information under extreme pressure. Admiral Blackwood approached Rebecca with the measured respect due to an operative who had maintained perfect cover while operating in hostile territory for an extended period. The conversation between them was conducted in voices too low for the gallery to overhear, but their body language spoke of professional recognition between individuals who operated in spheres where failure meant consequences far more serious than legal prosecution. "Agent Thompson," Admiral Blackwood said, her voice carrying just enough volume for the court officials to hear, "the Department of Defense extends its appreciation for your service during Operation Playground Shield. Your mission performance exceeded expectations, and the intelligence you gathered has already resulted in arrests spanning 3 continents." The words hit the courtroom like successive shockwaves as the scope of Rebecca's actual mission became clear. This was not a simple undercover operation focused on local crime, but rather an international intelligence effort that had implications reaching far beyond Riverside County. The mild-mannered substitute teacher who had spent weeks grading spelling tests and mediating playground disputes had actually been conducting surveillance and intelligence gathering that would impact global efforts to combat human trafficking. David Rodriguez found himself simultaneously vindicated and overwhelmed as he realized that his client's refusal to cooperate with her defense had not been stubborn self-destruction, but rather operational security protocols that prevented her from compromising missions he lacked the clearance to understand. Every question she had declined to answer, every background detail she had refused to provide now made perfect sense within the context of classified operations that required absolute discretion. The jury members who had deliberated for 2 days before reaching their guilty verdict sat in various stages of shock and confusion as they processed the revelation that their careful consideration of evidence and testimony had been based on incomplete information by design. The woman they had convicted of criminal assault had actually been preventing crimes so serious that their details remained classified even after her cover had been blown. Dr. Sarah Martinez, whose daughter Emma had been one of the intended targets at the fundraiser, approached the bench area with tears streaming down her face. As a military spouse, she understood the sacrifices made by those who served in uniform, but the realization that someone had been watching over her child while pretending to be a simple educator created emotions she struggled to process. The guilt of having judged Rebecca harshly during the trial mixed with gratitude so profound that she could barely speak. Agent Lisa Carter, whose federal investigation had been terminated with such abrupt finality, now understood why her superiors had been so insistent about maintaining distance from the case. Rebecca Thompson was not a person of interest in some peripheral investigation, but rather an active operative whose exposure would compromise operations spanning multiple agencies and international partnerships. The FBI's role had been to provide interference and misdirection, ensuring that local law enforcement attention did not accidentally uncover classified activities. The media representatives in the gallery found themselves in an unprecedented situation as they realized that the story they had been covering was actually the tip of an iceberg that extended into waters they would never be allowed to explore. Cameras that had been recording every moment of the trial were now capturing information that would likely be classified retroactively, creating legal and ethical complications that their news organizations had never contemplated. Principal Hayes approached Admiral Blackwood with the mixture of respect and confusion that civilian educators experience when confronted with the realities of military operations. His question was simple but profound: how do I explain to parents that we unknowingly hired a federal agent to teach their children? How do I address the trust issues this will create with our community? Admiral Blackwood's response demonstrated the kind of diplomatic skill required for managing the intersection between classified operations and civilian populations. Principal Hayes, what you hired was exactly what Agent Thompson appeared to be: a dedicated educator who cared deeply about the welfare of children. Her cover identity was not a deception of who she is, but rather a role that allowed her to serve in multiple capacities simultaneously. The children in her care received excellent education while being protected from threats they never needed to know existed. The elegance of this explanation began to resonate with parents and staff members who had worried about the implications of having been unknowingly involved in a federal operation. Rebecca's performance as a substitute teacher had not been an act in the traditional sense, but rather a genuine expression of her commitment to protecting and educating children. Informed by training and awareness that elevated her effectiveness far beyond normal civilian capabilities. Mrs. Foster, whose emotional attachment to Rebecca had grown during their weeks of working together, found the courage to approach the woman she now knew to be a federal agent. Her question was simple: was any of it real? Did you actually care about the children, or were we all just part of your mission parameters? Rebecca's response, delivered in the same gentle tone that had characterized her interactions throughout her time at Maplewood Elementary, provided reassurance that touched everyone within hearing range. Mrs. Foster, caring about those children was never part of my cover story. It was the most genuine aspect of my entire assignment. Protecting them was not just my professional duty but my personal commitment. Nothing about that was pretense. The authenticity in her voice convinced even the most skeptical observers that Rebecca's dedication to education and child welfare had been real, even while serving the larger mission that had brought her to their community. This revelation helped bridge the gap between the woman they had known and the federal operative she had now been revealed to be, suggesting that both identities were genuine expressions of the same fundamental character. Detective Sullivan, whose investigation had been the first to uncover the federal dimensions of Rebecca's background, approached Admiral Blackwood with questions about the operational security implications of the exposure that had occurred during the trial. His concerns were professional rather than personal, focused on ensuring that whatever damage had been done to ongoing operations could be minimized through proper coordination with local law enforcement. Detective Admiral Blackwood replied, Agent Thompson's cover was scheduled for termination within the next 2 weeks as Operation Playground Shield moved into its final phase. The events at the fundraiser accelerated our timeline but did not compromise the essential mission objectives. In fact, her actions may have prevented casualties that would have been far more damaging to operational security than premature exposure. This information provided context that helped local law enforcement understand their role in events that had seemed to spiral beyond their control. The arrest, investigation, and trial had not been mistakes that interfered with federal operations but rather components of a larger strategy that used local judicial processes to maintain credibility while more sensitive aspects of the mission were completed behind the scenes. The transformation of understanding throughout the courtroom was profound and irreversible. Every interaction that observers could remember having with Rebecca Thompson was being recontextualized through the lens of her true identity and mission. Parents recalled conversations about child safety that now seemed far more informed than could be explained by simple teacher training. Staff members remembered her unusual awareness of security protocols and her uncanny ability to identify potential problems before they developed into crises. Part 4. The mission revealed. Admiral Blackwood's decision to provide additional operational context reflected the complex balance between maintaining necessary security and addressing the legitimate concerns of civilians who had been unknowingly involved in classified activities. The courtroom remained packed despite the formal conclusion of legal proceedings as community members struggled to process revelations that transformed their understanding of events they had witnessed firsthand. Operation Playground Shield. Admiral Blackwood began her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing congressional committees on matters of national security, was established 18 months ago in response to intelligence indicating that international human trafficking networks were specifically targeting children of military personnel stationed along the Pacific coast. The selection criteria suggested detailed surveillance of military families and sophisticated understanding of base security protocols. The scope of the threat began to crystallize for the audience as they realized that their community had not been chosen randomly but rather selected through careful analysis by criminal organizations with resources and capabilities that rivaled those of nation-states. The families attending the Maplewood Elementary fundraiser had been unknowingly participating in an event that served as a target-rich environment for predators who had spent months studying their routines and vulnerabilities. Rebecca Thompson, whose posture and bearing had continued to evolve throughout the Admiral's briefing, now stood with the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to operating in high-stakes environments. The gentle educator persona had not been discarded but rather integrated into a more complete picture of someone capable of functioning effectively across multiple professional domains simultaneously. Agent Thompson volunteered for this assignment. Admiral Blackwood continued. Despite the personal risks involved in deep cover operations that require extended isolation from normal support networks, her qualifications included advanced degrees in both education and international relations, fluency in multiple languages, and specialized training in counterintelligence operations. She was uniquely qualified to serve as both an effective educator and an operational asset. The revelation that Rebecca's teaching credentials were genuine rather than simply fabricated cover documentation provided additional context for the authentic connections she had formed with students and staff. Her effectiveness in the classroom had not been an act but rather the application of legitimate professional skills informed by training and awareness that elevated her capabilities far beyond those of typical substitute teachers. Dr. Martinez, whose daughter Emma had been specifically targeted by the trafficking network, found herself grappling with emotions that ranged from profound gratitude to overwhelming guilt about the trial proceedings. "Admiral," she said, her voice shaking with the effort to maintain composure, "how long were they watching our children? How long were we unknowingly exposing them to this danger?" Admiral Blackwood's response demonstrated the kind of careful information management required when addressing civilian concerns about classified operations. "Dr. Martinez, the surveillance activities we detected began approximately 8 months ago, but Agent Thompson's presence at your school provided protection throughout that period. Your children were never unguarded even when you were unaware of the threats they faced." This information provided reassurance but also raised additional questions about the extent of federal operations in their community. Parents began to wonder what other protective measures might be in place that they had never suspected and whether the apparent normalcy of their daily lives concealed layers of security activities designed to preserve their safety without their knowledge. Principal Hayes, whose responsibility for student welfare had been the source of considerable anxiety throughout the trial, approached Admiral Blackwood with questions that reflected the practical concerns of educational administrators. "Admiral, what protocols should we follow when federal operations require this kind of deep cover in educational settings? How can we balance operational security with our responsibilities to parents and students?" The Admiral's response revealed the sophisticated coordination required between federal agencies and civilian institutions when classified operations intersect with public services. Principal Hayes, protocols exist for these situations, but they require security clearances and training that cannot be provided retroactively. What I can tell you is that Agent Thompson's assignment included genuine commitment to educational excellence alongside her intelligence-gathering responsibilities. The complexity of managing operations that required federal agents to assume civilian roles for extended periods was becoming clear to the audience as they realized the careful coordination required to maintain both operational effectiveness and public safety. Rebecca's success in serving dual functions demonstrated capabilities that extended far beyond what civilian observers could have imagined. Agent Carter, whose FBI investigation had been curtailed at the highest levels, now understood her role in providing bureaucratic interference that prevented local law enforcement from accidentally compromising classified activities.
Her frustration at being denied access to information about Rebecca's background had actually been evidence of successful operational security rather than interagency incompetence. The 3 men who had been neutralized at the fundraiser now revealed to be operational elements of an international trafficking network represented just one component of a criminal organization with resources and capabilities that required federal response. Their arrest had provided intelligence that was already being used to dismantle network components in multiple countries, preventing crimes that would have affected hundreds of families similar to those in the Riverside County community. Detective Sullivan's questions about ongoing security measures reflected his professional concern for maintaining public safety while respecting the operational requirements of federal agencies. Admiral, what can you tell us about continuing threats to our community? Are there additional protective measures we should be aware of or security protocols we should implement? Admiral Blackwood's response balanced transparency with necessary operational security. Detective, the immediate threat to your community has been neutralized through Agent Thompson's actions and the subsequent investigation. However, networks of this type require ongoing vigilance, and federal agencies will continue to provide appropriate protective measures as long as they remain necessary. The reassurance provided by this information helped address community concerns while avoiding details that could compromise ongoing operations. The residents of Riverside County could return to their normal routines with confidence that appropriate protective measures would continue even if they remained unaware of their specific nature or scope. Mrs. Foster, whose emotional investment in Rebecca's welfare had grown throughout their weeks of collaboration, asked the question that many in the courtroom were thinking. What happens to Rebecca now? Will she be able to continue teaching, or has this exposure ended that part of her career? Rebecca herself responded to this question, her voice carrying the warmth that had characterized her interactions with students and staff, but informed by newfound awareness of her true professional identity. Mrs. Foster, my time at Maplewood Elementary has been among the most rewarding experiences of my career. While I cannot continue in my current assignment, I hope to find ways to remain involved in education, perhaps in settings where my unique background can contribute to protecting children while supporting their learning. The possibility that Rebecca might continue to work in education, albeit in different contexts, provided hope for community members who had come to value her contributions to their school. The integration of her federal training with genuine commitment to child welfare suggested possibilities for service that could benefit both educational and security communities. Part 5: Recognition and Respect. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely from the tense legal proceedings that had dominated the previous days to something resembling a classified briefing attended by civilians who were gradually understanding their proximity to operations that protected national security. Admiral Blackwood's decision to provide additional context reflected recognition that the community's involvement in classified activities entitled them to explanations that balanced transparency with necessary operational security. Agent Thompson's performance during Operation Playground Shield. Admiral Blackwood continued addressing the assembled community members with the respect due to citizens who had unknowingly supported federal operations, resulted in the identification and arrest of 47 individuals across multiple countries. The intelligence she gathered while maintaining her cover as an educator prevented the trafficking of an estimated 200 children, many of whom would have been specifically targeted due to their parents' military service. The scope of Rebecca's actual accomplishments began to register with audience members who had spent weeks viewing her as either a criminal defendant or a mysterious figure whose background remained frustratingly opaque. The substitute teacher who had helped their children with reading comprehension and playground disputes had simultaneously been conducting intelligence operations that saved hundreds of families from experiencing tragedies they could barely imagine. Dr. Martinez stood and addressed Rebecca directly, her voice carrying emotions that reflected both personal gratitude and professional respect for someone whose service had operated at levels she was only beginning to understand. Agent Thompson, I need you to know that as both a mother and a military spouse, I understand the sacrifices involved in the kind of service you provided to our community. Emma talks about you constantly, and I realize now that her safety was never at risk because you were watching over her. Rebecca's response demonstrated the genuine connections she had formed with the families in her care, connections that transcended the operational requirements of her assignment. Dr. Martinez protecting Emma and all the children at Maplewood Elementary was never just my professional duty. They became part of my life in ways that made this assignment both more challenging and more meaningful than any I had previously undertaken. The authenticity of these relationships provided reassurance to parents who had worried that their children's affection for Rebecca had been built on deception. The emotional bonds that had formed between students and their substitute teacher had been genuine even while serving the larger mission that had brought her to their community. Principal Hayes approached Rebecca with an expression that combined professional respect with personal gratitude. Agent Thompson, I want to formally thank you for your service to our school community. Your impact on our students has been profound, and I now understand that your commitment to their welfare extended far beyond what we could have imagined. Would you be willing to accept recognition from our school board for your contributions to student safety and educational excellence? The offer of civilian recognition for someone whose primary service had been classified represented the kind of bridge building between military and civilian communities that reflected mutual respect and understanding. Rebecca's acceptance would provide official acknowledgement of her dual contributions while respecting the operational security requirements of her federal service. Mrs. Foster, whose administrative role had given her extensive interaction with Rebecca throughout the assignment, stepped forward with a question that reflected the concerns of educational support staff. Agent Thompson, I hope you understand that those of us who worked with you daily developed genuine affection and respect for you as a colleague. Knowing that you were also protecting our students makes me proud to have been part of your mission, even unknowingly. Rebecca's response to this statement provided insight into the personal challenges faced by federal agents who must maintain authentic relationships while concealing essential aspects of their identity and purpose. Mrs. Foster, the relationships I formed at Maplewood Elementary were among the most genuine experiences of my career. Maintaining cover required hiding my training and mission, but never required pretending to care about the people I worked with. That care was always real. The distinction between operational deception and authentic relationship building helped community members understand how federal agents could maintain cover identities while forming genuine connections with the civilians they served. Rebecca's service had required compartmentalizing her professional capabilities while allowing her personal commitment to child welfare and education to operate without pretense. Detective Sullivan, whose investigation had been the first to uncover anomalies in Rebecca's background, approached Admiral Blackwood with questions about coordination between federal operations and local law enforcement. Admiral, what procedures should we follow if we encounter similar situations in the future? How can local departments support federal operations without compromising operational security? Admiral Blackwood's response demonstrated the importance of establishing formal protocols for managing the intersection between classified operations and civilian law enforcement. Detective Sullivan, your department's professional handling of this investigation actually supported our operational objectives even when you were unaware of the federal dimensions involved. We will be developing enhanced coordination protocols that provide local departments with appropriate guidance while maintaining necessary security. The acknowledgement that local law enforcement had inadvertently supported federal operations through competent investigation practices provided validation for Detective Sullivan's professional instincts while suggesting improvements in interagency coordination that could benefit future operations. Agent Carter, whose FBI involvement had been carefully managed to prevent interference with classified
activities, now understood her role in the larger operational framework. Her questions about ongoing security responsibilities reflected professional commitment to ensuring that federal resources continued to provide appropriate protection for the Riverside County community. Agent Thompson, Admiral Blackwood said, addressing Rebecca with the formal recognition appropriate for successful completion of a classified assignment, the Department of Defense commends your service during Operation Playground Shield. Your mission performance exceeded expectations, and the intelligence you gathered has contributed significantly to ongoing efforts to combat international human trafficking networks. The formal recognition provided official acknowledgement of Rebecca's accomplishments while maintaining the professional protocols appropriate for classified operations. The ceremony, conducted in the unusual setting of a civilian courtroom, demonstrated the flexibility required when operational security considerations intersect with the need for appropriate recognition of exceptional service. Judge Chen, whose authority had been superseded by federal classification protocols, approached Admiral Blackwood with questions about the legal implications of the revelations that had occurred in her courtroom. "Admiral, what provisions exist for protecting the community members who have been exposed to classified information through these proceedings? Do they require security clearances or special protocols for discussing what they have learned?" Admiral Blackwood's response addressed the practical concerns of civilian officials who found themselves inadvertently involved in classified matters. "Your Honor, the information provided today has been declassified to the extent necessary for community understanding and safety. However, certain operational details remain classified, and we will be providing appropriate guidance to ensure that sensitive information is protected while allowing normal community discourse about these events." The balance between transparency and security reflected the complex challenges faced when classified operations intersect with civilian communities, requiring careful management to maintain both operational effectiveness and public trust. Part 6. The Network Unveiled. The classified briefing room at Naval Base Coronado bore little resemblance to the elementary school classrooms where Rebecca Thompson had spent the previous months teaching multiplication tables and reading comprehension. Steel walls lined with soundproofing materials created an environment where the nation's most sensitive secrets could be discussed without concern for electronic surveillance or unauthorized access. Admiral Blackwood stood before an assembled group of intelligence officials, federal agents, and select community representatives who had been granted temporary security clearances to understand the full scope of Operation Playground Shield. Detective Sullivan found himself seated between an NSA analyst and a representative from the Department of Homeland Security, still processing the surreal transition from investigating a simple assault case to participating in a national security briefing. The previous week's courtroom revelations had been carefully sanitized for public consumption, but the complete truth proved to be far more complex and disturbing than anything he could have imagined. The wall-mounted displays showed a network diagram that resembled a spider web spanning multiple continents, with connection points marking cities where trafficking operations had been identified and dismantled. Riverside County appeared as just one node in a vast criminal enterprise that had been operating with sophisticated coordination and substantial financial resources. The scope of the investigation suggested years of planning and intelligence gathering that extended far beyond local law enforcement capabilities. Rebecca Thompson, now wearing her naval uniform for the first time since beginning her assignment, stood beside Admiral Blackwood with the bearing of someone who had operated successfully in environments where discovery meant death. The transformation from substitute teacher to intelligence operative was complete, but traces of her civilian persona remained in the way she interacted with the community representatives who had been included in the briefing. "The organization we identified through Agent Thompson's work," Admiral Blackwood began, her voice carrying the weight of information that had required presidential authorization to declassify, "operates as a hybrid criminal terrorist network with connections to state actors who use human trafficking as both a revenue source and a method of destabilizing military families. Their target selection criteria specifically focused on children whose parents held security clearances or had access to sensitive military installations. The strategic implications of using kidnapped military children as leverage against their parents created a dimension of threat that transcended simple criminal activity." Dr. Martinez, whose daughter Emma had been targeted, began to understand that the attack on their community represented an assault on national security infrastructure disguised as ordinary crime. Agent Carter, whose FBI investigation had been carefully managed to prevent interference with ongoing operations, now learned that her frustrating inability to gather information about Rebecca's background had been designed to protect not just one operative, but an entire network of federal agents working similar assignments across the country. The scope of protective operations suggested that communities throughout the United States were being safeguarded by invisible networks of federal personnel operating under civilian cover. The intelligence displays revealed communication intercepts that painted a picture of criminal organizations with capabilities rivaling those of foreign intelligence services. Encrypted communications, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and coordination across multiple time zones demonstrated planning and resources that challenged traditional assumptions about criminal enterprises. The men Rebecca had neutralized at the fundraiser represented just one operational cell in a network that spanned from Southeast Asia to Central America. Principal Hayes, whose security clearance had been expedited to allow his participation in the briefing, struggled with the implications of learning that his school had been selected as a target-rich environment by international criminals. The questions about staff vetting, security protocols, and parent notification created professional responsibilities he had never anticipated when entering educational administration. Agent Thompson's assignment required her to establish authentic relationships within the target community while conducting surveillance and intelligence gathering that could not be accomplished through traditional law enforcement methods. Admiral Blackwood continued, her effectiveness required genuine commitment to educational excellence alongside her intelligence responsibilities, making her one of the most challenging deep cover assignments we have ever undertaken. The complexity of maintaining authentic professional competence while conducting classified operations became clear as the briefing detailed the multiple skill sets Rebecca had employed simultaneously. Her teaching credentials were genuine, earned through years of study that had been funded and supported by military intelligence services as preparation for assignments requiring educational cover identities. Mrs. Foster, whose emotional attachment to Rebecca had grown during their weeks of collaboration, began to understand that her colleagues' exceptional organizational skills and intuitive understanding of child psychology reflected training that extended far beyond normal teacher preparation programs. The federal investment in creating operatives capable of functioning effectively in civilian professional roles suggested long-term strategic planning that spanned decades. The communication intercepts revealed that the trafficking network had conducted extensive surveillance of military families, learning their routines, identifying their vulnerabilities, and developing detailed profiles that would allow successful targeting of their children. School events like the Maplewood Elementary fundraiser provided ideal opportunities for observation and selection, making Rebecca's presence essential for detecting and preventing criminal activity. Detective Sullivan's questions about the scope of federal operations in civilian communities reflected concerns about the balance between security and transparency in democratic societies. The revelation that numerous communities were being protected by federal operatives operating under civilian cover created philosophical questions about the nature of government surveillance and the extent of security measures citizens were entitled to know about. The network's sophistication required a response that operated at similar levels of complexity and coordination, Admiral Blackwood explained. Traditional law enforcement approaches would have been insufficient to penetrate organizations with this level of operational security and international reach. Agent Thompson's mission represented one component of a larger strategy involving multiple agencies and international partners. The international dimensions of the operation became clear as displays showed arrest operations occurring simultaneously across multiple countries, all coordinated to prevent network components from warning each other about law enforcement activity. The timing of Rebecca's exposure at the fundraiser had actually accelerated a planned series of raids that resulted in the capture of senior network leadership before they could adapt to the compromise of their surveillance activities. The technical capabilities employed by the trafficking network included encrypted communication systems, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and financial networks that paralleled those used by nation-states for intelligence operations. Their ability to conduct detailed background investigations of potential targets suggested access to information sources that required federal response to counteract effectively. Agent Carter's role in providing bureaucratic interference that prevented local law enforcement from accidental, compromising classified activities was revealed to be part of a sophisticated deception operation designed to maintain Rebecca's cover, while ensuring that normal judicial processes could continue without exposing sensitive operations. The coordination required between multiple agencies demonstrated planning and resource allocation that reflected the highest levels of government priority. The psychological profiles of network operatives revealed individuals with military or intelligence backgrounds who had been recruited by criminal organizations offering compensation that exceeded government salaries. Their training and capabilities meant that confronting them required federal operatives with similar backgrounds and superior tactical skills, making Rebecca's specialized preparation essential for successful completion of her mission. Dr. Martinez's questions about ongoing security measures for military families reflected concerns that extended beyond her immediate community to encompass all military personnel whose children might be vulnerable to similar targeting. The briefing revealed that protective measures were being implemented at military installations worldwide, with protocols designed to identify and counter trafficking operations before they could achieve operational success. The financial investigation accompanying the operation revealed money flows that connected the trafficking network to other criminal enterprises including drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and terrorist financing. The multi-billion-dollar scope of their activities suggested that disrupting their operations would have effects extending far beyond preventing kidnappings, potentially impacting global criminal finance networks. Part 7. The broader conspiracies. The second phase of the classified briefing revealed layers of criminal organization that transformed the audience's understanding of the threats facing military communities worldwide. Admiral Blackwood activated additional wall displays that showed financial networks, communication patterns, and operational coordination that painted a picture of criminal enterprise operating with the sophistication and resources of hostile nation-states. Rebecca Thompson's assignment had been designed to penetrate what intelligence analysts had designated as Tier 1 criminal organizations, entities that posed direct threats to national security infrastructure through their targeting of military personnel and their families. The months she had spent grading arithmetic homework and supervising playground activities had actually been cover for intelligence gathering that revealed the full scope of operations that threatened military readiness and personnel security. The communication intercepts displayed on the briefing room screens revealed conversations in multiple languages between operatives who discussed military families with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested extensive surveillance and intelligence gathering. References to high-value targets and operational windows demonstrated planning that treated kidnapping operations as military-style missions with specific objectives and carefully coordinated timing. Detective Sullivan found himself examining evidence that revealed the three men Rebecca had neutralized at the fundraiser were not local criminals but rather international operatives with training and backgrounds that qualified them as enemy combatants operating on American soil. Their presence in Riverside County represented an invasion disguised as ordinary criminal activity, making Rebecca's intervention a defensive action against foreign aggression rather than simple crime prevention. The scope of surveillance conducted against military families proved to be extensive and sophisticated, involving electronic monitoring, physical observation, and infiltration of civilian institutions that served military communities. Schools, shopping centers, recreational facilities, and community organizations had all been penetrated by operatives gathering intelligence about potential targets and their vulnerabilities. Agent Carter's investigation had been carefully managed to prevent her from uncovering evidence that would have revealed the international dimensions of the conspiracy, protecting not just Rebecca's cover but the broader intelligence operation that required coordination with foreign partners whose cooperation depended on maintaining operational security. The FBI's domestic jurisdiction had been deliberately limited to prevent inadvertent compromise of international intelligence sharing agreements. The technical analysis of equipment seized from network operatives revealed capabilities that exceeded those available to most law enforcement agencies, including encrypted communication devices, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and weapons that suggested military or intelligence service procurement. The resources required to equip operatives at this level indicated funding sources that operated at nation-state levels. Principal Hayes learned that his school had been selected not randomly but through careful analysis of military family demographics, security protocols, and access patterns that identified Maplewood Elementary as an optimal target for surveillance and recruitment operations. The network selection criteria demonstrated planning and intelligence gathering that had been ongoing for years before Rebecca's assignment began.
The psychological warfare components of the trafficking operations proved to be equally sophisticated, designed to maximize trauma and leverage against military families while providing criminal organizations with assets that could be exploited for multiple purposes. The targeting of military children represented an attack on military readiness and morale that transcended individual criminal acts to constitute asymmetric warfare against American military capabilities. Mrs. Foster's questions about the security implications for civilian educators revealed that school personnel throughout military communities had been unknowingly exposed to foreign intelligence operations designed to gather information about military families. The integration of educational institutions into national security infrastructure required new protocols and training that few civilian administrators were prepared to manage. The financial investigation revealed money flows that connected the trafficking network to hostile foreign governments whose strategic objectives included undermining American military effectiveness through attacks on personnel and their families. The billions of dollars involved in these operations suggested state-sponsored activity disguised as criminal enterprise, making Rebecca's mission essential for protecting national security rather than simply preventing local crime. Admiral Blackwood's explanation of the intelligence sharing protocols revealed that Operation Playground Shield had been coordinated with allied nations whose military families faced similar threats from the same criminal networks. The international cooperation required to combat organizations operating across multiple jurisdictions demonstrated the global scope of threats facing military communities worldwide. The operational timeline revealed that Rebecca's mission had been planned and executed as part of a larger strategy designed to dismantle trafficking networks before they could achieve operational success against military targets. Her assignment represented one component of a coordinated response that involved multiple agencies, international partners, and resources allocated at the highest levels of government. Dr. Martinez began to understand that the protection of her daughter Emma had been part of a larger mission to safeguard hundreds of military children who had been identified as potential targets through sophisticated surveillance and intelligence gathering. The scope of protective operations suggested that federal agencies had been working to defend military families against threats they never knew existed. The technological capabilities employed by the trafficking network included cyber warfare components designed to penetrate military computer systems through exploitation of personnel whose children had been kidnapped. The multi-domain approach to attacking military infrastructure through family targeting represented a new form of warfare that required innovative defensive responses. Detective Sullivan's realization that local law enforcement had been operating in an environment penetrated by foreign intelligence operatives created concerns about the security of routine police activities and the potential for compromise of legitimate law enforcement operations. The intersection between national security threats and community policing required new protocols and training that few departments were prepared to implement. The briefing revealed that similar operations were being conducted in military communities throughout the United States and allied nations, suggesting that Rebecca's assignment was part of a global defensive strategy designed to protect military personnel and their families from coordinated attacks disguised as criminal activities. The scope of protective operations indicated resource allocation and strategic planning that reflected the highest levels of government priority and international cooperation. Part 8: Personal Sacrifices. The third phase of the classified briefing shifted focus from strategic implications to the personal costs borne by federal operatives who conducted deep cover assignments in civilian communities. Admiral Blackwood's presentation revealed aspects of Rebecca Thompson's service that illuminated the human dimension of intelligence operations that required individuals to compartmentalize their identities and relationships in ways that civilian observers could barely comprehend. Rebecca's preparation for Operation Playground Shield had required her to essentially create and inhabit a completely fictional personal history while maintaining authentic professional competence and emotional connections with the people she served. The psychological training necessary to sustain such complex role-playing for extended periods involved techniques that pushed human adaptability to its limits while ensuring operational effectiveness. The civilian community representatives learned that Rebecca had been essentially isolated from her normal support networks for the duration of her assignment, unable to maintain contact with family, friends, or colleagues who knew her true identities. The emotional strain of living without authentic personal relationships while forming genuine but necessarily temporary connections with students, parents, and staff created psychological pressures that few people could sustain successfully. Detective Sullivan began to understand that Rebecca's calm composure during interrogation and trial proceedings reflected not just professional training but years of experience in managing the stress of maintaining cover identities under extreme pressure. Her ability to compartmentalize emotions and information while appearing completely natural in civilian interactions represented psychological conditioning that bordered on the superhuman. The educational credentials Rebecca had earned as preparation for her cover identity were genuine achievements that had required her to master subjects and skills far beyond her intelligence training. Her effectiveness as a substitute teacher reflected authentic expertise in child development, educational psychology, and curriculum design that she had acquired through years of study specifically for assignments requiring educational cover. Agent Carter learned that Rebecca's assignment had required her to live in genuine isolation, unable to access the normal support systems available to other federal operatives. The safe houses, communication protocols, and emergency extraction procedures that typically protected undercover agents had been deliberately minimized to ensure that her cover identity remained completely convincing to hostile surveillance. The psychological evaluation protocols revealed that Rebecca had undergone extensive testing in preparation to ensure her ability to maintain authentic emotional connections with children while simultaneously gathering intelligence that could result in their protection from threats they would never know existed. The cognitive complexity required to serve dual functions effectively challenged the limits of human psychological adaptabilities. Principal Hayes discovered that Rebecca's exceptional performance as an educator had been supported by resources and training that exceeded anything available to civilian teachers. Her intuitive understanding of child psychology, her ability to identify and address potential problems before they developed into crises, and her exceptional organizational skills reflected preparation that represented significant federal investment in creating operatives capable of functioning at the highest levels in civilian professions. The operational security requirements of her mission had prevented Rebecca from forming genuine friendships or romantic relationships throughout the duration of her assignment. The isolation required to maintain cover had created personal sacrifices that extended far beyond professional inconvenience to encompass fundamental human needs for connection and authenticity that most people take for granted. Mrs. Foster's emotional reaction to learning about Rebecca's isolation reflected the civilian perspective on personal sacrifices that federal operatives accept as necessary components of their service. The realization that Rebecca's warmth and friendship had been both genuine and carefully constrained by operational requirements created complex emotions that combined gratitude with sadness for the personal costs involved. The medical monitoring required during deep cover assignments revealed that Rebecca had been under constant psychological and physical stress that required careful management to prevent breakdown or compromise of her mission effectiveness. The support systems available to her had been necessarily limited and covert, creating additional isolation that compounded the normal stresses of intelligence work. Martinez began to understand that Rebecca's protective instincts toward Emma and other children had created emotional bonds that would be severed upon completion of her assignment, adding personal loss to the professional challenges of transitioning between cover identities. The psychological cost of forming genuine relationships that must be abandoned represented a form of recurring trauma that few people could endure successfully. The debriefing protocols revealed that Rebecca would require extensive psychological support to process the experiences and relationships formed during her assignment before she could transition to new missions or civilian life. The complexity of reintegrating operatives who had lived authentic civilian lives while conducting classified operations created challenges that intelligence agencies were still learning to address effectively. The financial sacrifices required for deep cover assignments included foregoing normal career advancement, relationship development, and personal asset accumulation that civilian professionals expect as natural progression in their lives. Rebecca's service had required her to essentially pause her personal development while dedicating years to protecting people who would never know the extent of her sacrifices on their behalf. Admiral Blackwood's explanation of the selection criteria for deep cover operatives revealed that Rebecca had been chosen not just for her professional qualifications, but for psychological resilience and emotional stability that allowed her to maintain authentic relationships while serving classified mission objectives. The screening process for such assignments eliminated most candidates who lacked the rare combination of technical skills and psychological adaptability required for success. The community representatives began to understand that Rebecca's service represented a level of personal sacrifice that extended far beyond normal military or civilian government service. Her willingness to essentially surrender her personal identity and relationships for the protection of people she had never met demonstrated commitment that challenged civilian understanding of duty and service. The long-term effects of deep cover assignments on operatives included challenges in forming authentic relationships, difficulty trusting civilian institutions, and psychological adaptation issues that required ongoing support and monitoring. Rebecca's successful completion of Operation Playground Shield represented not just professional achievement but personal survival of experiences that fundamentally altered her relationship with civilian society. The protocols for recognizing and supporting operatives who had completed deep cover assignments revealed federal acknowledgement of the extraordinary personal costs involved in such service. Rebecca's transition back to military life would require
careful management and support to help her process experiences that few people could understand or relate to, making her essentially a refugee from the civilian life she had protected. Part 9. The Ripple Effects. The conclusion of Operation Playground Shield created consequences that extended far beyond the immediate participants to affect civilian institutions, law enforcement protocols, and international cooperation frameworks that would influence security operations for years to come. Admiral Blackwood's final briefing segment addressed the systemic changes being implemented as a result of lessons learned from Rebecca's assignment and the broader investigation it had supported. Detective Sullivan found himself selected for specialized training that would prepare local law enforcement personnel to recognize and appropriately respond to federal operations conducted within civilian communities. The protocols being developed would ensure that future investigations involving federal operatives would be coordinated from the beginning rather than discovered accidentally through routine police work. The educational implications of Operation Playground Shield led to the development of enhanced security protocols for schools serving military communities, with training programs designed to help civilian educators recognize potential threats while maintaining the normal educational environment that children required. Principal Hayes would be among the first administrators to receive classified briefings about security challenges facing educational institutions. Agent Carter's experience managing the FBI's peripheral involvement in the operation resulted in her selection for a joint task force responsible for developing improved coordination protocols between federal agencies conducting overlapping operations. The bureaucratic challenges revealed by Rebecca's case had exposed weaknesses in interagency communication that required systematic reform. The international cooperation demonstrated during the trafficking network investigation had created new frameworks for sharing intelligence and coordinating operations across national boundaries. Allied nations whose military families faced similar threats had committed to enhance cooperation and information sharing that would provide earlier warning of developing threats and more effective coordinated responses. Mrs. Foster's emotional investment in Rebecca's welfare had qualified her for security clearance and training that would allow her to serve as a liaison between federal agencies and civilian educational institutions. Her genuine understanding of both educational requirements and security concerns made her uniquely qualified to help develop protocols that balance transparency with necessary operational security. Dr. Martinez's experience as both a military spouse and a parent whose child had been targeted led to her involvement in developing support systems for families affected by security operations. The psychological impact on civilians who discovered they had been unknowingly involved in classified activities required specialized counseling and support services that civilian healthcare systems were not prepared to provide. The technological innovations developed for Operation Playground Shield were being adapted for use in other security applications, with communication systems, surveillance equipment, and analytical tools providing capabilities that enhance the effectiveness of federal operations while reducing risks to both operatives and civilian populations. The legal precedents established through Rebecca's case created new frameworks for managing the intersection between classified operations and civilian judicial systems. Judge Chen's experience handling classified documents and federal intervention would inform training programs for other civilian judges who might encounter similar situations in their courtrooms. The financial networks disrupted through the trafficking investigation had created opportunities for enhanced international cooperation in combating criminal organizations that threaten multiple nations. The billions of dollars recovered through asset seizures would fund expanded security operations while demonstrating the economic benefits of effective intelligence cooperation. Principal Hayes's school district had become a model for implementing enhanced security measures that protected military families while maintaining normal educational environments. The protocols developed at Maplewood Elementary would be adapted for use in school districts throughout the country that served significant military populations. The psychological support systems developed for Rebecca's reintegration were being expanded to assist other federal operatives who had completed deep cover assignments in civilian communities. The recognition that such service created unique challenges had led to enhanced support programs that addressed both immediate and long-term effects of extended isolation and role-playing. The media management strategies employed during Rebecca's case had created new protocols for protecting operational security while maintaining appropriate transparency about federal activities in civilian communities. The balance between public information rights and national security requirements had been refined through lessons learned from managing civilian exposure to classified operations. Detective Sullivan's department had been selected as a pilot program for enhanced training that would prepare local law enforcement to recognize and appropriately respond to federal operations conducted within their jurisdictions. The success of this training would determine whether similar programs would be implemented nationally. The scientific research conducted on the psychological effects of deep cover assignments had contributed to improved selection and training protocols for federal operatives. Rebecca's successful completion of Operation Playground Shield had provided data that would help prepare future operatives for similar assignments while identifying potential problems before they could compromise mission effectiveness. The community response to Rebecca's revelation had demonstrated civilian resilience and adaptability when faced with exposure to classified operations. The positive outcome had informed federal planning for future operations that might require similar coordination between military personnel and civilian communities. The international criminal networks dismantled through Operation Playground Shield had created opportunities for enhanced cooperation between allied nations in combating threats that transcended national boundaries. The success of coordinated operations had strengthened relationships between intelligence agencies and law enforcement organizations worldwide. The technological capabilities developed for monitoring and infiltrating criminal networks had applications beyond trafficking investigations, providing enhanced capabilities for combating terrorism, espionage, and other threats that required sophisticated intelligence gathering and coordination. The innovations pioneered during Rebecca's assignment would influence federal security operations for decades to come. The personal relationships formed between Rebecca and the civilian community had demonstrated the possibility of authentic connection between federal operatives and the people they served, challenging traditional assumptions about the necessary isolation of intelligence personnel. The success of her integration had informed new approaches to deep cover assignments that balanced operational security with human psychological needs. The broader implications of Operation Playground Shield continued to unfold as federal agencies implemented lessons learned from Rebecca's assignment and the international cooperation it had fostered. The success of protecting military families while maintaining civilian community relationships had created new models for federal operations that required extensive coordination between military and civilian institutions. Part 10: The Hidden Network. 6 months after Operation Playground Shield officially concluded, Detective Sullivan stood in his new office at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia, reviewing case files that would have been inconceivable during his years with the Riverside Police Department. His selection for the Joint Task Force had opened his eyes to a world where federal operatives moved through civilian communities like ghosts. Their presence felt only when crises demanded their intervention. The morning briefing included updates on 17 ongoing operations across the continental United States, each involving federal agents embedded in civilian institutions ranging from elementary schools to senior centers. The scope of protective activities suggested that American communities were being safeguarded by invisible networks whose existence challenged traditional concepts of domestic security and surveillance. Rebecca Thompson appeared on his secure video feed from an undisclosed location, her bearing reflecting the confidence of someone who had successfully transitioned from deep cover operations to training and development responsibilities. Her assignment now involved preparing other operatives for civilian integration missions, using lessons learned from her months at Maplewood Elementary to enhance federal capabilities for community protection. Detective Sullivan, she said, her voice carrying the warmth that had characterized her interactions with students and staff, but informed by newfound authority in her specialized field. Your department's handling of my case has become a model for local law enforcement interaction with federal operations. The protocols we developed together are being implemented nationwide. The transformation in Sullivan's understanding of law enforcement had been profound and irreversible. His previous conception of criminal investigation as a straightforward process of evidence gathering and prosecution had evolved into appreciation for the complex coordination required when national security operations intersected with civilian communities. Agent Carter joined the video conference from FBI headquarters in Washington, her responsibilities now encompassing coordination between multiple agencies conducting similar operations. The bureaucratic challenges that had frustrated her during Rebecca's case had led to systematic reforms in interagency communication that prevented conflicts and enhanced operational effectiveness. The intelligence networks we've identified through cases like Operation Playground Shield, Agent Carter explained, operate with sophistication that requires federal response at levels we're still learning to coordinate. Local departments like yours, Detective Sullivan, are essential partners in ensuring that our protective activities enhance rather than compromise community safety. The case files Sullivan reviewed revealed patterns of criminal activity that transcended traditional jurisdictional boundaries, with organizations operating across multiple states and countries in ways that required federal coordination and resources. The trafficking network dismantled through Rebecca's mission had been connected to dozens of other criminal enterprises whose activities threatened American security interests worldwide. Principal Hayes had accepted a position with the Department of Education's new Office of School Security, developing protocols that protected military families while maintaining normal educational environments. His experience managing the aftermath of Rebecca's revelation had qualified him uniquely for work that balanced transparency with necessary operational security. The challenge we face, Principal Hayes explained during a secure conference call, is ensuring that enhanced security measures support rather than disrupt the educational mission that serves military children. Agent Thompson's success demonstrated that protection and education can be integrated effectively when operatives possess genuine professional competence alongside their security training. Mrs. Foster had completed federal training that qualified her for a liaison position between educational institutions and security agencies, her emotional intelligence and administrative experience making her invaluable for managing civilian personnel who became involved in classified activities. Her role involved providing support and counseling for educators who discovered they had been working alongside federal operatives. The psychological research conducted on deep cover operations had revealed that successful integration required operatives who possessed authentic competence in their cover professions, making assignments like Rebecca's dependent on federal investment
investment in education and training that exceeded normal intelligence preparation. The multi-year commitment required to create operatives capable of functioning effectively in civilian roles represented a significant evolution in federal security strategy. Dr. Martinez had become an advocate for military families affected by security operations, developing support systems that help parents and children process their involvement in classified activities. Her experience with Emma's targeting had provided insights into the psychological impact on families who discovered they had been unknowingly protected from threats they never suspected existed. Military families deserve to understand the security challenges they face, Dr. Martinez explained during a conference focused on family support services while respecting operational requirements that protect ongoing missions. The balance between transparency and security requires constant attention and adjustment based on evolving threats and community needs. The international cooperation fostered through Operation Playground Shield had expanded into formal partnerships between allied nations facing similar threats to their military populations. The success of coordinated operations had demonstrated the value of sharing intelligence and resources across national boundaries while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Rebecca's transition from field operations to training responsibilities had created opportunities for her to share insights gained through civilian integration with other operatives preparing for similar assignments. Her experience at Maplewood Elementary had become a case study in federal training programs, illustrating both the challenges and opportunities involved in deep cover community protection missions. The technological innovations developed during the trafficking investigation had been adapted for use in other security applications, providing enhanced capabilities for monitoring and responding to threats against military installations and personnel. The communication systems, surveillance equipment, and analytical tools pioneered during Rebecca's mission had applications extending far beyond trafficking investigations. Admiral Blackwood's oversight of the transition from Operation Playground Shield to ongoing security programs reflected federal commitment to maintaining protective measures while incorporating lessons learned from successful operations. The systematic approach to improving federal capabilities demonstrated institutional learning that would benefit future missions and the communities they served. The legal frameworks established through Rebecca's case had been refined and expanded to provide clearer guidance for managing civilian exposure to classified operations. The precedent set by Judge Chen's handling of federal intervention had informed training programs for judicial personnel who might encounter similar situations in their courtrooms. The financial investigation that accompanied the trafficking network dismantlement had recovered assets worth billions of dollars, providing funding for expanded security operations while demonstrating the economic benefits of effective intelligence work. The success of disrupting criminal financial networks had created opportunities for enhanced international cooperation in combating organizations that threaten multiple nations. The community response to Rebecca's revelation had exceeded federal expectations for civilian adaptability when exposed to classified operations. The positive outcome had informed planning for future operations that might require similar coordination between military personnel and civilian communities, suggesting that transparency within security constraints could enhance rather than compromise operational effectiveness. The monitoring systems established to track the long-term effects of Operation Playground Shield continued to provide data about community resilience and adaptation following exposure to classified activities. The research findings were influencing federal policies about civilian involvement in security operations and the support systems required to manage such involvement effectively. Detective Sullivan's new responsibilities included developing training materials that would prepare law enforcement personnel nationwide to recognize and appropriately respond to federal operations in their jurisdictions. The success of improved coordination between local and federal agencies had demonstrated the value of enhanced communication and mutual understanding of respective roles and capabilities. Part 11, Lasting Bonds. The annual recognition ceremony at Naval Base Coronado brought together participants from Operation Playground Shield for the first time since the classified briefings that had revealed the full scope of their involvement in protecting national security. The gathering represented more than simple commemoration. It demonstrated federal commitment to maintaining relationships with civilian communities that had supported classified operations. Rebecca Thompson stood before the assembled group wearing dress blues that that reflected her promotion to lieutenant commander. Her advancement accelerated in recognition of her exceptional performance during the civilian integration mission. The transformation from substitute teacher to decorated naval officer was complete, but her interactions with former colleagues retained the genuine warmth that had characterized her relationships at Maplewood Elementary. Detective Sullivan approached Rebecca with a mixture of professional respect and personal gratitude that reflected his evolution from local law enforcement officer to federal liaison specialist. His new role had expanded his understanding of security challenges facing American communities while providing opportunities to contribute to protective efforts at levels he had never imagined possible. Commander Thompson, he said, extending his hand with the formality appropriate for military recognition. I wanted to thank you for the impact your mission has had on my career and my understanding of the service provided by people like you. The coordination protocols we developed have enhanced security for communities throughout the country. Rebecca's response demonstrated the balance between military professionalism and personal connection that had made her civilian integration so successful. Detective Sullivan, your department's handling of my case created a model for law enforcement cooperation that has improved federal operations nationwide. The professionalism you demonstrated under difficult circumstances contributed significantly to our mission success. Principal Hayes had traveled from Washington, where his work with the Department of Education had expanded to encompass security coordination for military families worldwide. His experience managing the aftermath of Rebecca's revelation had positioned him as a leading expert in balancing educational responsibilities with security requirements. Commander Thompson, Principal Hayes said, approaching with the respect due to someone whose service had protected the children in his care. The protocols we developed at Maplewood Elementary have been implemented in school districts serving military families across the globe. Your dedication to education alongside your security mission has influenced federal policy about civilian institution involvement in protective operations. Mrs. Foster attended the ceremony with security clearance that reflected her ongoing role as liaison between educational institutions and federal agencies. Her emotional intelligence and administrative experience had made her invaluable for managing civilian personnel who discovered their involvement in classified activities, providing support and counseling that helped communities adapt to exposure to security operations. The civilian representatives present had been carefully selected based on their continued involvement in activities related to Operation Playground Shield. Their security clearances maintained to allow ongoing participation in programs that built on lessons learned from Rebecca's mission. The federal investment in maintaining these relationships demonstrated recognition of civilian contributions to national security. Dr. Martinez brought Emma to the ceremony, the young girl now old enough to understand that her former substitute teacher had been protecting her from dangers she had never known existed. The reunion between Rebecca and her former student illustrated the genuine connections that had been formed during the operation, relationships that transcended the professional requirements of the mission. Miss Thompson, Emma said, using the name she had known throughout their time together, Mommy told me you were a special kind of teacher who kept us safe. Thank you for taking care of us. The innocent gratitude in her voice reflected the civilian perspective on security operations that protected communities without their knowledge. Rebecca knelt to Emma's level, her response demonstrating the authentic care that had made her civilian relationships genuine despite their operational context. Emma, you and all the children at Maplewood Elementary made my assignment meaningful in ways that went far beyond my professional duties. Protecting you was both my mission and my privilege. Agent Carter participated in the ceremony via secure video link from her current assignment in Europe, where she was coordinating international operations that built on intelligence gathered during the trafficking investigation. Her experience managing the FBI's involvement in Rebecca's case had prepared her for complex multi-agency coordination that spanned national boundaries. Commander Thompson, Agent Carter said from her secure communication facility, the intelligence protocols developed during Operation Playground Shield have enhanced our ability to coordinate with international partners in ways that protect civilian populations while maintaining operational security. Your mission has had implications that extend far beyond the community you directly served. The ceremony included presentation of civilian recognition awards to community members who it supported the operation through their professional competence and personal resilience when exposed to classified activities. The federal acknowledgement of civilian contributions represented a significant evolution in how security agencies recognized the importance of community partnerships. Admiral Blackwood's address to the gathering emphasized the continuing importance of community-based security operations and the lessons learned from Rebecca's successful integration at Maplewood Elementary. Her remarks reflected federal commitment to maintaining and expanding protective measures that relied on cooperation between military personnel and civilian institutions. The success of Operation Playground Shield, Admiral Blackwood stated, demonstrated that federal security operations can be conducted within civilian communities in ways that enhance rather than compromise community safety and cohesion. Commander Thompson's mission has become a model for operations that protect American families while respecting the civilian institutions that serve them. The technical presentations during the ceremony revealed ongoing innovations in communication systems, surveillance equipment, and analytical tools that had been developed based on operational requirements identified during Rebecca's mission. The federal investment in enhanced capabilities demonstrated commitment to protecting military families through technological advancement alongside human intelligence operations. The international representatives attending the ceremony included officials from allied nations whose military families had benefited from intelligence sharing and coordinated operations that grew out of the trafficking investigation. The global implications of Rebecca's mission reflected the international scope of threats facing military communities and the cooperative responses required to address them effectively. The psychological support services developed for operatives and civilians involved in deep cover operations had been expanded based on lessons learned from Operation Playground Shield. The recognition that such missions created unique challenges for all participants had led to enhanced support programs that addressed both immediate and long-term effects of exposure to classified activities. The educational research conducted on Rebecca's teaching methods had contributed to improved training for federal operatives who might be assigned to cover positions requiring authentic professional competence. The multidisciplinary approach to creating operatives capable of serving dual functions had applications extending far beyond intelligence work to encompass any situation requiring federal personnel to integrate effectively with civilian communities. The community impact assessment conducted following the operation had provided data about civilian resilience and adaptation that informed federal planning for future missions requiring similar community involvement. The positive outcomes had demonstrated that transparency within security constraints could enhance operational effectiveness while building public trust in federal protective activities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.